Hey everybody, I'm Michael Mandel. I'm co-founder and CEO of CompStak, and this is another episode of the Not Podcast podcast. I'm here with Will O'Donnell, who is Managing Director and Head of Global Corporate Development and Growth for Prologis and founder of Prologis Ventures. And I'm going to hand it over to Will. Will, you can tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do, and then we'll dig into our conversation.
Thank you, Michael. I'm very excited to be here with you today. As you mentioned, I have a very weird and esoteric title, I guess. So to give you a little background, Prologis owns 1.3 billion square feet of logistics real estate in 20 different countries. So you kind of go through a supply chain. We're the largest partner of most of our customers in trying to figure out their supply chain networks and warehouse network for supply chain. So my role at the company, I've been at the company for over 21 years now. So served a pretty wide variety of roles, but the most recent one is really looking at how do we leverage our infrastructure and platform to drive more value for our customers. So on the venture side, we're looking at investing in emerging business models or technologies that may impact how Prologis or our customers do business and drive value. We also will incubate and start new business lines leveraging our platform. So it's really taking a customer-centric approach to real estate, which is unusual for our environment because I think most cases you spend 3 months negotiating a lease and then try to figure out ways to not talk to your customer for the next 5 years. We've actually gone through the opposite of how do we leverage our position to become a better partner and drive more value for our customers.
Awesome. So in your role, what I think is really exciting about chatting with you is that you get exposure to so many kinds of businesses, so many aspects of the Prologis business that you've got a pretty broad range of experience and an oversight of a lot of areas. So I'm really excited to dig in. That said, we're going to force you to mainly talk about data because that's what we talk about in this podcast. But you can talk about whatever you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah, data is
But
kind of important these days. There's
the,
this little thing called AI out there that I'm just hearing about this day. No, I'm just kidding.
there
Yeah.
you
So
go.
data is important, right?
There you go. So, would love to maybe get a little bit of an overview of how Prologis thinks about data. How do you quantify the risk related to your internal data? How do you think about external data? Give us kind of like a broad overview, and then we can dig in a
Mhm.
little more.
So I think at the core, if you look at what we do at Prologis and we're really good at, it's driving investment decisions and outcomes. And that concur both on how do we deploy our capital, and then when we acquire assets, how do we manage and optimize the value that we get from those assets? So at the end of the day, we make a lot of decisions that drive outcomes. Ultimately, data is a key part of that decision making. So the way we've looked at it is how do we enhance our ability as a company to make decisions? And then how do we increase the velocity of how we make those decisions? And that's where we've spent a lot of time. There's a foundational aspect of it of actually like you hear the expression data in, data out. And if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So probably 3 or 4 years ago, 35% of our company's bonus that year was tied to data centricity. So we had 6 different categories and we had to achieve 99% accuracy across those 6 different categories as a company. And you can imagine when that spotlight shined on achieving that, how focused we are. Now, important aspect is you can't do it once and then walk away. Like data is a reoccurring continual investment, but it did put us in the right position. And it happened to be the year and that November that ChatGPT was introduced and came out. So we had invested pretty heavily in the right foundational infrastructure. Then we pushed the company to really spend time cleaning up our data, categorizing it, and putting it in usable formats. And then GPT came out, and suddenly we were able to democratize the access to it.
Could you talk a little bit more about what that infrastructure is without giving up too much of your secret sauce?
Yeah, I mean, this is looking at from the cloud infrastructure. So how we like all companies, we have a variety of different enterprise systems that we use. We've pulled the data out of those enterprise systems and created a data lake that we then have put in best in class infrastructure, and how do we manage and be able to access and utilize that data lake. So everything from the cloud infrastructure, what type of business intelligence software we're using, et cetera, so we can rapidly. I, I think one of the biggest challenges with data is the change management, because a ton of work needs to go in to actually clean up the data and make sure people go through the steps of actually inputting it correctly and understand why. And that was one of the biggest areas of change management that we realized is we need to really invest in, especially in the field, and helping them understand the benefits and the outcomes they would get from having better access to data and being able to utilize the tools that we had. So from everything from the CRM system that we use, how do you input data in there that then feeds into the data lake that then we can access as a company to expedite how fast we can make decisions.
What kind of decisions are you making using data?
Yeah, I would say you break it into a couple key categories. There's capital deployment. So we're in 20 different countries. And then in a market like a country like the US, we may be in 30 some markets. So on a daily basis, monthly, yearly, like how do we think about portfolio theory there? So where are we allocating capital to? And then you can buy existing buildings, you can develop speculatively, we can do build to suits. We have a fund business where we have strategic capital and partners there. So how do we optimize the performance of our funds? We're doing a lot of ongoing portfolio work, looking at the management of our facilities. So how are different submarkets performing? And then leasing is a big area that we've utilized a lot of data to enhance decisions, where
Mhm.
you have some asset classes like apartments, where they use revenue management as a
Sure.
way to really almost in real time dictate what a specific unit should go to. B2B or commercial is a little bit different because the transactions is a little less velocity that happens with leasing transactions on an office or industrial side. But there's a lot of data that can help a leasing officer make better decisions. So where are we in the market? Are we going for occupancy, or are you going for rent growth? What are the underlying economics that may be occurring around the facility? So access to public transportation, what is the supply and demand, access to labor. So there's a lot of factors that may go in to a decision that all buildings aren't equal in value to each different company who might be leasing it. So the better we can use data to understand those dynamics, the better we can appropriately price our real estate.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's actually something we've heard, from other clients of
Yeah.
ours, on the industrial side, revenue management, or thinking about, automating leasing assumptions and setting your rents is something that I think a lot of people are thinking about on the industrial side, and frankly, it's probably a little simpler than it is, for instance, on the office side, or retail because, industrial, while every industrial building's a little different, they're also a lot more the same and normalized than a lot of office buildings might be, right? Now there's
Yeah, and
nuances. Yeah,
here's why I'll push back a little on that, because I think you're right in regards to the buildings are relatively the same, whereas a tire wholesaler can come into a building and a e-commerce company can come into the building, both utilize that same footprint. The reality on that example, a tire wholesaler is going to look at the location of that building, proximity
for
to
sure.
buyers, very different than an e-commerce building. So if we have a building, I'm calling from our headquarters in San Francisco, we have a couple buildings that are right at the base of the Bay Bridge when it turns into Oakland. A e-commerce company that's looking to drive commerce sales within San Francisco is going to view that real estate as a premium versus someone who's storing snow tires
Well,
for the
but
winter.
presumably though, when you price it, you're
Yes.
pricing it based off of an e-commerce use because it's so
Yes.
good for that. And if the tire guy wants to pay the premium for e-commerce to get it, they're gonna have to.
They're
That's what
going to
they're
do
gonna
it.
have to do, right? So from that standpoint, you
So
know,
that touches on when we look at revenue management. We spend a lot of time thinking about the underlying business case and how the customer use it
Yeah.
versus someone in office maybe thinking about, okay, this is a class A building.
Sure.
This is the location because the location may be driving more customers there, and ours, the location drives the business intent, which then gets in the economics of how much they could afford to actually pay based on what their business is. So
Right.
I was just pushing back slightly on it is simpler in some ways, but it's more complex because we actually have to understand how
Yeah.
the customer utilizes and operates that facility and what truly
Right.
their margins are. Because at the end of the day, we need our customers to be successful too.
Sure. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, when you think about things like revenue management and your
Yeah,
and setting rents, and maybe there's a lot of other areas. I mean, similarly, I guess in maybe creating like automated valuation models when you're thinking about um, estimating what you might pay for an asset and things like that.
yeah.
Where do you draw the line between what is automated and what is done by a human? Is I presume there's a bit of a human in the loop kind of model here that you're employing, and how do you think about that? And aren't and is that on a spectrum?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think beyond even Prologis, but it's something that everyone's struggling with today on how do I integrate AI tools into our workflows? So, what part of someone's job is operational and structure and repetitive, and which part of a job really needs human centricity and thinking and strategic thought around it? And the reality is, most jobs are a combination of both. So, the way that we've looked at it, it's AI is really, really good at connecting dots and being able to pull information from a wide variety of resources in a faster manner than humans can do. Um, at the end of the day, there are judgment calls, especially when you're looking at things around capital deployment, allocating capital, making decisions that require nuance behind it. And most leasing decisions also do require nuance in a business environment based on who the customer is and their needs. Capital deployment, so building a building is the same way. However, if we can take a decision that may have taken 2 months of analysis to do and be able to compile the information so you're 70, 80% of the way there, and then spend a week strategically thinking about it, we as a company are going to be much more efficient. So the way we've looked at it is you still want humans to make those critical decisions, be able to understand nuance. However, if we can empower our employees and then frankly with our customers with better information in a timely manner, you're going to continue to make better decisions. And the flip side in what's interesting about something like supply chain, no matter how much you can build a model, you're never going to predict the uncertainty that will happen. By that, natural disasters happen to impact the flow of goods. We obviously have some political turmoil that's happening right now with tariffs, et cetera, that's creating uncertainty. You get a boat stuck in the Suez Canal. So, as good as my AI model is, I'm never going to predict with certainty that that will happen. However, when it occurs, the faster you can pull information together to be able to put together a cohesive and thoughtful response creates resiliency and allows our customers to be better positioned to make the right decision as things change. And that's kind of the same philosophy we take on the real estate side, that there's certain decisions that are repetitive. In that case, they can be automated, but the key critical issues and being able to respond to exceptions and change, that's where better data empowers people to make better decisions.
Got it. So when you try to empower your team internally with this data to make
Yeah.
decisions, do you get pushback? How's you mentioned the cultural
Yeah.
shift. There's a cultural shift in getting people to input everything in a CRM, sure, but what about when you start telling them, okay, I don't agree with your decision because the data doesn't agree with it or the AI doesn't agree with it. How has that been?
I would say that um there's two aspects to that. I think there's a tremendous amount of change management that is required right now with adoption of any technology, but this particular AI. And I think part of it is Um, one, when you ask people how they what they do at work or what their job is, most people describe the process that they go through on a daily basis for what they do. A smaller amount of people will actually describe the outcome that they achieve at work. So
Mhm.
if you think about it in that fashion, when I describe to you my job is going in and I analyze a bunch of companies and I read investment memos and I make decisions and I'm describing the work that I do. So when someone comes in and says, "Well, Will, you don't have to read all these investment committee memos, that we can categorize it and pull out the key points," it suddenly is challenging. Well, that's what I do, right? Now, the outcome which I'm really trying to achieve is like making better investment decisions. So there's a ton of change management that's occurring to realize that there are parts of people's job that is an important part today, but if AI can accelerate the writing of a market report, for example, that may have taken 3 weeks for an analyst to do previously. Now it can be done, get there 80% of it, and that person spends a day or two editing it to get to the right one. They're achieving the outcome, which was how do we make a decision on that market or investment opportunity much faster than what they had previously viewed was my value was giving you the report. So I think there's a ton of work that all companies are going through right now is how to balance those two, and AI can lead to faster and better outcomes. The other question, though, you asked was, okay, when AI disagrees with the expert. And the reality is sometimes it's just wrong. Like we all have seen it hallucinate. And what's interesting, a colleague and I were talking about this the other day, is one of the downsides of AI is it's incredibly supportive of whatever decisions or ideas you have. And by that, you can put a terrible idea into AI, like, this is amazing.
Yeah,
My friend, my friend
that's a
was
great
actually just,
idea, Michael.
yeah. he was
Let's
he
go
was
with
actually
that.
telling the story. He told us to their team, and they were driving in Texas at the time. And his team's like, "No, no, it's a great tool." And he's like, "Okay, watch this." He typed in the AI, like, "I'm driving down the road and I see trash on the side of the road. I want to pick up all this trash and use it to build a rocket ship to Mars." And AI was like, "This is a great idea. You should do this." Way to think. And Damon's like, "No, no, it was a terrible idea. AI needs to tell me it's a terrible idea." So I think the aspect that, like, if you take it a step further, it is going to be wrong sometimes, where you still need a human in the loop. And the danger that I can see starting to happen is people lose critical thought because they can just be like, "Well, this is what AI said." At the end of the day, if AI is agreeing that building a rocket ship out to Mars out of trash you find on a Texas highway, like, someone's got to take critical thought and, like, yeah, no. However, it can be used on a tool like if you actually had real rocket parts, like, it's a great
Right.
tool to tell you how to put them together to do a rocket, right? So I think it needs to be done in context, and humans are an important part of validating, like, is this actually pointing us in the right direction?
Absolutely. That I mean that makes a lot of sense, and I think, but I do think actually over time, as the AI gets smarter, you know,
Yeah.
you're gonna not be able to just assume that the human is right all the time, or is more
Yes.
likely right, as and there's probably going to be more pushback progressively.
Like 100%. And I think as you go through, I mean, we've adjusted prompts to up and develop more critical thought from the AI output, so it isn't agreeing that my rocket ship to Mars is a good idea. And I think there's a personality trait that works well with it. I mean, people who are intensely curious tend to really appreciate AI because it gives them the ability to get more facts that can help them make a decision
Absolutely.
better. I think taking rigidity and, well, I'm right in black and white. Well, that's probably kind of a personality challenge to begin with, but uh, yeah, AI is going to be much better than I ever will about looking at a million data points and surmising it in 15
Yeah.
minutes,
Yeah.
and it's going to be helpful.
Yeah. So to expand on that a bit, you mentioned that the first step, and it was around the time that ChatGPT came out, was making sense of all of your data internally and
Yeah.
encouraging your team to make sure their data was clean. You did that. You were probably well ahead of the curve of most companies in bringing together your data in a data lake in a way that you could actually leverage it with technologies like a ChatGPT. And when we think about the progression for AI readiness, with
Yeah.
our clients, that's often step one, is make sense of
Yeah.
your own data so that you can ultimately leverage it and get insights from it. And then step two, which, selfishly and self-servedly, we play into, is bringing in outside data to give you market context so that you're not,
Yep.
in your own echo chamber of what your data says without understanding what the market says. Um, Presuming you agree with that idea,
I do.
what's next for you when there's lots of different third party data out there, some of it kind of like obvious, some of it maybe not as
Yeah.
obvious. What do you think about as the key data sets that you leverage to give you more context alongside your internal data?
It's a good question. And one point of clarification too, and when we made the decision, was it 3 or 4 years ago, to do that as a bonus, we had been trying to clean up our data for 3 or 4 years before that. And it was
Sure.
all kind of a carrot and like, hey, people entered this correctly. Uh, I think it showed a commitment, and it was like the kind of the old Charlie Munger statement. You show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome. Well, when we were trying to be nice and making it okay, please enter your data. It took a long time. When everyone's bonus for that year was tied to it. I mean, the outcome was it got done. I think, and we had been doing a lot of AI before. What GPT really did is democratize it, so now everyone has access. Where we're spending a lot of time is kind of breaking it into a couple different buckets. There's some uses which are just continual improvement on how do we take this process, and formulaic, rather than individually writing letters to a customer about a cam charge or something, you can automate that through an agent. Um, there is a lot of insight that we're pulling then on customers, for example, and there's internal conversations, internal data we have on that, but there's a ton of information in the public records from earnings transcripts, podcast, press releases, etc., that historically has been hard to disseminate and pull together. And people individually listen to um, earnings transcripts and then write their key points. That now can be captured in a much more larger scale and in a quicker manner. When you look at things like real estate, looking at the amount of time that we take unstructured data, whether it's zoning codes, environmental reports, utility layouts to decide on sites, that's all information that can be better captured and digested through data. So, way we've looked at it, to answer your question, is there's certain data we have that's proprietary that we know. There's a ton of unstructured data in the world where a lot of our jobs have been, how do I go try to get a sense of a sentiment in a community around certain zoning regulations, for example. Those are all tools that we can now use to pull in and take highly disparate unstructured data and make sense of it. I think what we're also starting to understand is kind of second or third wave implications of data and what it could mean, because it's hard as a human to connect the dots or sometime. But we recently did a podcast on supply chain and freight data. And freight data is interesting because it's like, if you think about it, it's actually a canary in the coal mine for the economic health, because trucks have to move before I can buy a good. So if freight data to retail centers have slowed down, that will show up in retail sales in 2, 3, 4 months. Um, but there's a lot of nuanced data within there that, without technology, you'd never be able to understand the correlation between flatbed trucks and the housing market, because flatbed trucks happen to be how a lot of the materials that
Mm.
go into the housing market um, are transported. So that's where it becomes really interesting, and the cost of testing and piloting has gone down significantly. So being able to pull in third-party data and understand what relationships it has or what ripple effects or implications it have, it can be much more, and how it can be used predictively to make better decisions. That's what's really exciting right now, I think.
Awesome. So I'm gonna I'm gonna change the subject a little
All
bit.
right.
Well, maybe not too much. I want to talk about your role specifically within Prologis Ventures,
Yeah.
and because you're seeing all sorts of new ventures within PropTech,
Yeah.
within data, within AI, and want to get an understanding from you because you probably have more transparency into this than most as to where you see new opportunities, what you're hearing about that is exciting versus what is, just
Yeah.
BS and hype in the market right now. Because I know that I personally have a lot of startups that approach CompStak around wanting to leverage our data, and I see a lot of repeats, and I see a lot of
Yeah.
stuff that's vibe coded, and by one person, but saying they've got a company, and I have trouble understanding what's truly real out there for sure.
Well, those are good questions. I think one of the aspects that when we started Prologis Ventures 9 years ago, one of the things that I found is um, it's hard. Like we initially were in a very reactive position, and by that, all this new technology comes up, and everyone's PowerPoint looks fantastic, and there's all of these bells and whistles, and there's a lot of a hype cycle around. I mean, you can go back, it was blockchain, then Web 3.0, and that now we're in AI, and like there is validity and like a lot of use cases behind these technologies, but a lot of times, I mean, the whole Gartner hype cycle, et cetera, especially when they come out, people get really excited. Um, what we figured out is that we were in a unique position to truly understand the underlying pain point and like what the root cause of friction is. And people generally try to avoid friction. But in the context of innovation, it can be really helpful because if you embrace that, okay, what we're doing is hard, friction occurs, then you start asking, well, can constraints be removed that allow something new to happen? And that's really what innovation is. So by us working internally or then with our customers to truly understand pain points, when we go out and look at technology, we have a context or view on does this actually solve what the pain point is? And I think that's part of the challenge that I've seen, especially when you get into industries like real estate or supply chain, which tend to be very fairly established industries with certain practices that inherently seem confusing to an outsider, but when you understand the dynamics of the industry to make sense, having an idea then if you can truly apply the technology against a pain point is valuable. An example, CompStak, like you all understood the fact that access to good comp data in a real time was like a huge pain point in the industry. And it solved a company like ours issue of like, I want realistic comps to be able to make decisions. I think what people tend to be very enamored with a lot of times is technology versus does this actually solve a true business issue? And on consumer side, it's a lot easier when you start doing things like social media because we all kind of live and breathe it and understand it inherently. But when you're building a robot inside a warehouse, like, yeah, the LiDAR and your computer vision and all is pretty cool. But if you don't hit human level parity, the technology is not going to be adapted. And I think that's the same thing that's happening a lot of the prop tech startups where you've seen ways where it would be, okay, everyone wants to get into doing digital twins. And the question there is, what's the problem that the digital twin's actually trying to solve that creates a better outcome for our Pelagius or our customer versus, okay, it's a fancy way to view your building in 3D. Uh, and I think the companies like yours and others that have been successful are the ones that truly started with the pain point and then figured out how to leverage technology to get the right solution versus a lot of the Me Too companies you mentioned either see someone else doing it or it's okay, here's a new technology. I'm going to go in and revolutionize how this industry is done because this technology without actually like change management's hard in these businesses. You have to have an incrementally better solution for people to actually want to adopt it.
Got it. Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. Obviously, I think that's been a real differentiator that I've identified, not just for us, but
Yeah,
for prop tech companies generally. That like the ones started by people who come from the industry tend to be more successful than those
yeah.
who didn't, who inherently understand the problem. Um, but also,
It's
yeah,
interesting on that because it's like it's the conundrum. Because if I've been in the industry for 20 years, I've developed certain frameworks and processes for how I do things. And that's what makes me successful. So that's where the disruption occurs is because, well, I've always leased a building this way and I'm really successful at doing it. Look at my salary, like title, and I've done really well for 20 years. But when you introduce technology, it can suddenly remove a constraint. So you need someone who has visibility in the industry, but is a curious enough and flexible enough thinker to actually being willing to change a core process without feeling like it's going to completely disrupt my image of how I am as a real estate person.
yeah. Well, and then I think, to take it one step further too,
Yeah.
it's not just a matter of does it solve the problem? It's to because there are lots of things that solve a problem, but if the problem doesn't cost you enough money, or if
Mm,
you or if the problem doesn't, or save you enough time, or if you have lots of
yeah.
extra time and it saves you time, maybe you don't care. One thing that we've noticed and thought about with some of our customers or our prospects is like, you know we provide as much value in our data. For the data is just as valuable for someone who is doing 100 deals a month as someone who's doing one deal a year. But the
Yeah.
person who's doing one deal a year might have time to go make 1,000 phone calls to try to figure out how to get this data some other way, whereas the person doing 100 deals a month doesn't have the freaking time for that. And
Yeah.
so just because it's adding the same value on a per deal basis and they still can see the inherent value, one is more likely to buy than the other. Or similarly, like can't tell you how many CRMs I've seen for commercial real estate brokers, right? And there is still no predominant CRM for commercial real estate brokers. Everybody came in with the mindset that brokers really value their time and that they'll spend money to free up their time because that's their only asset, right? Theoretically, right?
Yeah.
But in actuality, brokers want deals. And if a broker
Yeah.
has and commissions are really big, and when a broker has a deal that has a really big commission tied up for it, they no longer care about their time. They will spend it, right? Like they will spend as
Yeah.
much, the money's too good and the deal's too exciting, and time management is not where they're spending their activity, right? Their interest or their mental capacity. Like, okay, whatever, I'll spend whatever time I need to spend. I want to get this deal done. Doesn't matter to me at the end of the day, right? Anyway, whatever. I'm going on a
No,
tangent.
it's an interesting point because I mean, Hamid Moghadam, who's the founder and CEO of Pilates, is obviously a very brilliant individual. But one of the things I think he's best at is really putting simple frameworks for us to look at things. And on this question, one of the things he always pushes is this a function that is touched by a lot of people on a very often basis, and it's high value. Because to your point, if it's something that's okay, once a year we need to do an audit of XYZ, and that takes two people, that's not a like, sure, we could solve a technology, but that's not a high velocity, high touch thing. So it's a very simple framework that he's pushed on focus on the things that are highest value. And the easiest way to think about that is the greatest number of people touch it on like a regular basis.
Sure.
And if you start filtering that, then you very quickly realize, okay, here's the 5 key processes we have as a company, and how do we attack it?
That's interesting. So does that mean when you're evaluating, you know, a startup that is, wants to that might be you might be a customer of or an investor in, is it as simple as saying how many people internally are involved in this thing? And if you've got 100 people at Prologis that deal with this thing, you're going to look at it more seriously than if you have one person at Prologis that deals with this thing?
Yeah. And okay, so the one exception would be that, like risk management, we have a small team that does that, but that affects all 7,000 buildings we have, right?
Right.
So there's scale there. But the majority of processes are exactly what you're saying. So it's if you're going in and fixing now, one of the aspects of GPT that's cool is that for those individual process, because we know how Prologis GPT, if I have a process that just affects me, I can go build my own agent or my own GPT to impact. So we've been giving the tools now to someone's self-service, their unique one-person problem.
Right.
Uh, but where we as a company invest our time in building out solutions is those that affect the most amount of people making the most common decisions. Now, the other aspect then you think about is buy, build, or partner. And if we go back to what makes Prologis unique, it's the decision making and the velocity of those decisions. So there's some technology, and I'll give an example, like a lot of AI agents for inside sales coming out right now. So that theoretically could be something that Prologis decides that, okay, we could go build this. This is pretty easy. However, actually, it's not that easy, but we could go build it, right? But the reality is that's more of a rising tide. Like that's something we should outsource and use a third party because their solution's just going to be better because they're doing it across 200 companies and will focus full time on making the best inside sales solution. If we're making a decision on how we integrate on demand energy generation into a building that's unique to us, well, that's something that we should invest our time and money and focus on because that's helping us make a better decision. That's truly our secret sauce. So that's one of the areas we spend a lot of time now too thinking about is where do we want to partner and bring in best in class resources around us, and then to where do we take our own budget focus on the things that are key.
Got it. To what extent, when you're making these decisions on whether it's build versus buy or whether it's invest in a
Yeah.
company or not, or use a new technology or not, I mean, what I guess the opportunities or advantages of being a venture guy in a large company that is a potential user of technology, right? Is that you have the resources of that technology at your disposal. How often do you call on people throughout the organization to help you make these decisions versus making it with yourself or within your group?
Um, every day. I mean, and by framing it how I did earlier, where we're looking at root causes and areas of friction, that we'll work closely both within our customer base, but then within our own employees' business lines of understanding where those issues are. And that way, when we're finding solutions, we're coming in as, hey, you defined it as friction or a challenge here. Here's 2 or 3 companies that could solve it. So there's context and there's partnership on it. So, I mean, the way that and part of the reason why I love this job, I'm in a very unique position where I get to talk to so many different really smart people, both internally within the company, but then outside of all these startup entrepreneurs and continually learning and connecting the dots on, okay, we need X, Y, and Z done. Here's some entrepreneurs who are attacking it. And a lot of one of the things that we really leverage is adjacent learnings. And by that, yeah, what we're doing is relatively new for a real estate company, but most components of it, one way or another, are being done by someone else somewhere. Now, we'll go study insurance industry to see how they do risk management, risk underwriting, et cetera, and pull in some best practices from that. that we can apply against pain points that we're seeing. We'll go study financial services. We'll spend a lot of time looking at other tech companies to see how they're doing, setting up their data lake so we can pull it in. That way, I mean, one of the things I say internally all the time, like in college it was plagiarism, but in business it's efficiency. So like, I'd much rather start on second or third base, to use the
Sure.
sport analogy, than like try to warm up and hit pitches. So the more that we can leverage best ideas, and that's for me one of the things I love about this job is that I'm continually have the opportunity to meet really interesting, unique people, gather different perspectives, and then use that to try to create unique solutions for Prologis.
Got it. So you mentioned that you have like this advantage of knowing what problems you have internally, and then you can seek out companies or solutions to solve them. Does that mean that you're going to tell us all about what are the problems that you think are most interesting to solve? So you mentioned digital twins as one that
Yeah.
maybe
Here,
not. Like what are the
well,
problems you think are exciting to solve right now?
yeah. Digital twins, since I brought it up, is an interesting one, and I think where we are excited about digital twins are how do you create a digital platform that then I can do scenario or simulations against, and by that, customers moving into the warehouse are putting in automation and robotics. And right now, it's a very manual process. You're doing things in spreadsheets, and it's to some degree a guessing game on what's going to work. A digital twin in that environment, manufacturing, you can completely simulate the environment. You can simulate the use of robots. You can simulate all these disparate systems actually working together before you start investing the capex. So that's for us really interesting because it solves a true pain point that exists. Now, visualization of energy data as a sole use of a digital twin, it's not really how customers or even Prologis absorbs energy data. So that's where something like a digital twin becomes really exciting, where you're allowed to. It's physical AI, and how do I visualize a 3-day environment and all the components and working together in a more seamless fashion. Energy, as I just mentioned, is a huge area of focus right now. From everything from industrial sites are getting more energy intensive as customers invest in automation. Um, you've got EV infrastructure that's going in, and we are doing a lot of things right now around data centers. So upgrading the energy grid and creating resiliency in our buildings is a key area of focus.
Hmm.
We're doing a lot of things around construction materials, net zero. So how do we accelerate the use of green steel, green concrete, a lot of infrastructure to drive efficiencies in operating buildings? We've talked about data. That's a key area of focus. And I think the way that um, data and AI is an interesting one because it's obviously now the hot thing and everyone's an AI company. We will not invest in a foundational model company just because that's there's enough capital going after that. What we're really looking is how do we get solutions that are vertically focused that help enhance decision making. And that gets into what we were talking a little earlier on. We have our data, but how are people pulling in proprietary, unique third party data that can then couple with our data, allow us to make better decisions?
Right.
Um, and that's a lot of it when you get into construction, for example, or development. You have all these disparate data parts all over the place, whether it's zoning codes and all those things. Like if you're building a building, you need to compile that information together to make decisions. So things like that, where there is publicly available data, or you guys have built out a proprietary database of comps, like that type of information is very interesting for us.
Okay, so let's close it out and talk a little bit more about data sharing, and
Mm.
guarding versus guarding of data. I know that this is an area that you have thoughts on. What do you think? And as the largest industrial operator out there, right? You have access to more data than anybody else in your space, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think about what should be out there and shared versus what is an advantage to you internally?
I think it's a good question. I think philosophically, the way I think about it is in an ecosystem where people are sharing data, um, they have to feel by contributing data in, they get an exponential return on what they get out by contributing in. So if I put in a piece of data, let's call it 1 unit, I get 3 units of value out. And I think that's been one of the challenges within the real estate industry that you've probably had many sleepless nights about. But our industry grew up with a lot of stakeholders whose value proposition was related to I have better or asymmetric information advantages over my competitors. And it's how people made a lot of money in this industry. I think in the last 10 years, we've seen a realization that some of that information, like, is being not commoditized, but by being part of a larger pool, I'm getting better insight than what I might have. Um, but I think it's still the biggest challenge the industry faces is that, like, what's the point of collaboration where contributing in gets me a higher return than historically the asymmetric advantage that different stakeholders have because they happen to control information. Um, and I mean, of anyone, you can probably speak
Yeah,
to that, whether it's developers, whether it's brokers, whether it's
yeah.
asset managers, et cetera. I mean, each of us
Well,
feel like,
we're at
yeah,
an interesting sort of intersection of it, right? Because on the one hand, you would think, and in many ways we are, the biggest proponents of data sharing, right? Our whole entire
yeah,
business is based off of crowdsourced data, and we've got 42,000 people sharing data, and we rely on that. On the other hand, we spend we've spent tens of millions of dollars, um, or more, making sense of that data, cleaning up that
yep,
data, normalizing that data, validating that data. And so we're certainly still protective of that data once we've put a lot of work into it. We don't want it, we're not just putting it
yeah,
out there freely on the internet, and we would be absolutely, freaking out if that were to happen, you know, given all the work put in. So it's like, okay, everybody
Mhm.
share, but not too much, right?
Yeah,
We have to toe that line. Um, I think what it comes down to in my mind is like being real, being
mhm,
absolutely freaking real about what is out there and what is going to be out there and what do you have control over and what don't you have control over, right?
yeah,
Like we have caps on how much data people can take out, but we also recognize that we can't, expect you to not share some element of it with your team, with your partners, with your principal, or else you're not
mhm,
going to be able to use it, right?
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
same thing as it relates to a company like a Prologis. Yes, you have, you know, all sorts of data on the transactions you've done, but CompStak has it too because we get it from all the brokers, in the industry, and that's just a reality. And it's like I think where people struggle and where people lag behind is when they refuse to admit reality as it relates to data and data sharing. You have to be like they put their head in the sand and it's like be real about what really is your advantage, be real about what isn't, and but be
yeah,
real about what maybe is, but it's temporary and it's going to change, and maybe you need to get ahead of the curve on it. So that's my assessment is like you got to size up the risk and the reward and be real about where things are going because it's going to change, and you can't
yeah,
you can't keep things the way it always was. This has been fun. I think we're
yeah.
pretty much we're pretty much out of time here. So I really appreciate the time you've spent talking to us about data, talking about AI, about what you do, and I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to the Not Podcast.
My
And
pleasure.
if anyone has not done it, you're listening to this podcast, so maybe you've subscribed, but if you haven't, you can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, and follow us on all social media channels, particularly Friendster and MySpace. Those are the ones where we really spend the most time.
Was it
And
Tom was your first friend on MySpace.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Everybody,
He's
go.
giving away free Labubus for anyone who subscribes to this podcast.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that too. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.